Welcome to Issues That Matter. My guest today is Scott Ritter and Diane Sare, and we're going to talk about the fall of Kevin McCarthy and something that's not really brought up too much on the news, but it's something that Diane and I have spoken about. So, Diane, why don't you get the ball rolling? What do you think this is all about?
Well, it is largely about this catastrophe in Ukraine. It's about many things, but we're really at a breaking point. And I did hear a snippet of a Twitter, or I guess now it's called X post by Congressman Matt Gaetz, who said that McCarthy went behind the back of everyone and was cutting a side room deal with Biden to continue funding the war in Ukraine. Now, you saw what's happened in the last weeks, which is frankly extraordinary and indicates a change that the lying, pompous news media never would have expected. One, that Zelensky was not invited to speak before the U.S. House of Representatives as he was before, and people might remember that obscene, I don't know, some kind of kiss of Nancy Pelosi, the kiss of death, I guess. And then the Senate did not approve. First, Biden wanted $20 billion of new funding for the Ukraine war. Then it was $6 billion. The continuing resolution in the Senate, which doesn't have a Republican majority, did not include any of the new funding for Ukraine. So Biden then gets on the phone to his European partners saying, oh, I know the majority of people, Chuck Schumer, my former candidate, senator that I was running against last election, says, no, we have a majority of people in both parties supporting this. Well, maybe they think they have that in the Congress. They surely don't have it in the American population. This was the first time in history a speaker was removed in this fashion by an initiative from someone in his own party. It's a really big deal, not to be underestimated. And I think we have to press the offensive. We can't leave it at that. We have to cut off the funding to this war. If people are concerned about the well-being of the people in Ukraine, stop funding the war. And I just want to add one other thing. There's a kind of a Delphic nasty argument because Biden has tied his reelection to the Ukraine war or an alleged possible Ukrainian victory. But I saw an email from a peace group, I think it might have been Peace Action Now, saying, number one, we shouldn't let the right-wing MAGA Republicans cut off, the MAGA Republicans are not the neocon Republican, but whatever. We shouldn't let them cut off aid to Ukraine. They need humanitarian aid. We can't have a collapse in government. Why are they making that argument? And what on earth would give anyone the idea that aid to Ukraine would be equitably distributed, especially knowing Penny Pritzker is Biden's appointed czar, the big billionaire funder of Obama, of Reconstruction. Now, how can you talk about Reconstruction when the war isn't over? So this is really a fraud. I think it's designed to divide the peace movement. I think we have to go for the jugular and get them to stop funding this war. So I think this is a big deal, but it's only the beginning. Those are my thoughts.
Scott?
Look, I'm not a political scientist and I'm not an expert on American politics, but I'm a historian, though, and I can go back in time and remember when the Tea Party came into being and how it represented basically a civil war, political civil war within the Republican Party. And what we're seeing today is a manifestation of that same split. Let's be clear. The vast majority of the Republicans in the House of Representatives support continued funding of the Ukrainian conflict. An overwhelming number of them do. They all wear Ukrainian flags. Like Kevin McCarthy, they'll put Ukrainian colors on their clothing. They'll embarrass themselves, debase themselves, discredit themselves. But it doesn't matter because they've bought into the Russophobic-driven policies of the Biden administration. But remember, these policies before Biden became president were policies of John McCain, a Republican senator. So the American Congress is 100, not 100, but let's say 96% behind Joe Biden's war on Ukraine. And if given their druthers, what's happening here is a parliamentarian exercise. It's beyond simple Ukraine. Ukraine funding is the easiest thing for them to wrap their argument around. But included in this is frustration over immigration, border expenditures, just the fact that we have a $33 trillion debt. We have funding that's out of control. This is the argument of this faction of the Republican Party. And what they've done is taken advantage of the fact that they have that there's such a slim majority in the House of Representatives Republican that their numbers, which are not significant, we're talking a dozen representatives, their numbers are enough that and here's the key part, if the Democrats don't speak up in defense of Kevin McCarthy, then they will assemble sufficient votes to remove him from power. Let's just keep that in mind, guys. The Democrats made this happen as much as Matt Gaetz made this happen. The Democrats could have stopped this paralysis. The Democrats could have said, nope, we're happy with the speaker that's there. Matt Gaetz, go pound sand, disappear, you're irrelevant. But America has stopped functioning as a nation that is concerned about good governance. This is all about partisan politics. And the fact that the Democrats lined up behind Matt Gaetz to do this shows you the rot that exists in Washington, D.C. Ukrainian funding, yes, amongst the American people are by and large not. You're seeing a majority of the American people trend away from that. But when we parse that number down, it's really not as many as we think. First of all, the American public is largely ignorant about the reality of Ukraine, so they don't know what they're funding to begin with. To sit here and draw upon an argument that the will of the people, the will of a people, when it's founded upon ignorance, is not the will of anything, it's ignorance. And the American public continues to be ignorant about the reality of Ukraine and what they're funding. The peace movement is disgusting and disgraceful. They're not a peace movement, they're warmongers. They're literally, these are the same people that fought against Bush's war in Iraq, but as soon as it became Obama's war against the world, they were all in favor of it. There is no peace movement in America today, not one that's worthy of the name. There's certain peace initiatives run by well-meaning people, but they can't claim to be coalesced into a movement. And those that do coalesce in the movement have debased themselves with their actions by saying, let's continue the funding of a conflict that they don't understand. You can't get a single member of the peace movement here. I challenge them. Cynthia, you have a forum. Bring them on right here. Somebody in the peace movement that says we're in favor of continued funding, bring them on and have them articulate why they're in favor of this, what they believe Ukraine is. They can't. These aren't peaceniks. These are Biden, advocates. These are deep Democrats. And the Democratic Party is to blame as much as Matt Gaetz is for this paralysis. What's happening in Washington, D.C. is pure 100% American politics. And American politics today has nothing to do with national security, with the well-being of the country. It has to do with the empowerment of a political class. This is a sad state of affairs, where we have representatives and senators who view their election to Washington, D.C. as punching the ticket of success. They're on the gravy train. They're on the perpetual paycheck. They're on the let's use our status as elected representatives and the lack of any enforcement of any rules regarding us to get insider trading so we can make ourselves millionaires in a very short period of time. That's what this is about. It's about sustaining that kind of activity. This is where I disagree with Diane. I wish it was about Ukrainian funding, because then it'd be about something that you could put your hands on. We could have a legitimate debate about. Ukrainian funding is just the tool that's used. Yes, Kevin McCarthy went behind the backs, negotiated a secret deal with the Biden administration to get this continuing resolution forward. But the Republicans are just as angry about the continuing resolution as they are about the Ukrainian funding. They're more angry about the betrayal by Kevin McCarthy than they are about the Ukrainian funding. Ukrainian funding is just the excuse. If Ukraine didn't exist, Matt Gaetz would have found a different excuse to make this happen. This is not about Ukraine. This is not Republicans standing up and taking a moral stance against the war. This is about naked political power, plain and simple. That's my view on the situation.
What do you think, Diane?
Well, I definitely have a different opinion than Scott on this, and I will say the American people actually are far more aware of the criminal nature of the Ukrainian regime across the board. And it is clear, yes, it is, you're right on the question of why this happened, because a number of the Republicans who have been very vocal against funding Ukraine did not vote against McCarthy, like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Congressman Paul Gosar from Arizona, who has said many very strong things against continuing this war. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is the one most clear about, or has said explicitly that we could be in a nuclear war. But in the street, and this is something like the period going into where Hillary Clinton lost the election, where her campaign, the Democratic Party, the news media, the 17 intelligence agencies were sure that they had everything under control because they controlled the narrative. So they believed that everyone was going along with them. So there was no need for her to go to Ohio or Michigan or any of these other states. Why should she bother to talk to them and see what was on their mind? There was no way that these people would ever consider voting for a Republican after all. And to her and everyone's great shock, the narrative actually wasn't what the majority of the American people were thinking. And we experienced this phenomenon in the street. As a candidate for office, I am all over the place, including bastions of liberalism like Manhattan, Westchester County, or other less liberal parts of the country. I can say that I have found myself in meetings where I have been actually shocked to discover how closely people are following the situation in Ukraine. One was in a boxing club in the Bronx, Puerto Rican Americans, many of whom didn't speak that much English. And I gave a short briefing, and then one guy raised his hand and said, "Yeah, but aren't there Nazis in Ukraine? Doesn't Ukraine have Nazis?" This was a young Puerto Rican. I was handing out leaflets downtown in Manhattan, went into a convenience store. The 30-year-old clerk looked around totally terrified because, of course, everyone has to pretend they agree with the narrative. And then he said he wasn't sure how I would respond. He said, "This might be a conspiracy theory, but aren't there Nazis in Ukraine?" So I think this is actually much better known among the population, and it's an election year, and I think the Congress may be feeling some of that. I also don't want to leave out what is happening with the Robert Kennedy Jr. campaign and his expected announcement that he will be leaving the Democratic Party and running as an independent. And I know people may have seen some of the polls. There was just one put out that 63% of Americans wish there would be a third party or something other than the two-party system. I was in a rather affluent Westchester town the other day full of, I'd call them DNC Democrats. And I was actually handing out literature for RFK Jr. and was greeted with apoplectic rage fits. And I decided to try and engage some of these people and find out what they were so upset about. Were they supporting Trump? Were they supporting Biden? They said, "He's going to steal votes from Biden." And a vote for Kennedy is a vote for Trump. And I said, well, that would be better than Biden. That's a little sliver. The Democratic Party has destroyed itself. If they were so worried about Bobby Kennedy Jr. stealing votes by running as an independent, they should have agreed to count his vote. But they were incapable of doing that because they have tied themselves to a fascist, neocon, warmongering policy. So I think that things are wide open if people will move and will not be tricked into whatever reason why people don't act, why people don't get in the streets, why people don't demand that we stop this funding. And I do think that the non-election of Biden or any replacement of him is a life and death matter for this country. This 2024 election is unbelievably important. This evil rot has to be defeated, and I think there is a potential for that. But it's only a potential right now.
Matt Gaetz, he's the bad boy of the House of Representatives. And back in January, he really didn't want McCarthy. He did everything in his power to ensure that McCarthy did not win, but he did win. And Diane, who do you think is more disliked right now? Matt Gaetz or George Santos?
Well, disliked by whom, I think, is the question.
By the media, by the general public. What do you think?
Gaetz is seen as much more of a threat. Santos is just typical, I'm sorry to say. I have a friend who works on DC all the time, and she said she said almost everyone in the Congress could be removed for what Santos did. They all lie about who they are and what they, maybe that's what's wrong with my campaign. I should be more dishonest, but I don't intend to do that.
So, Scott, what do you think is going to happen? McCarthy is out. There's going to be a new speaker. They don't know if there's anybody on the Republican ticket who will fit the bill. I've heard Jeffries, which I think is a far stretch. What do you envision happening over the next week or two?
When you say Jeffries, you're talking about the minority leader.
Correct.
He'll never be speaker as long as there's a Republican majority. Let's just make this clear as day. There will never be a Democratic speaker as long as there's a Republican majority. That is the end of that discussion, I hope, because it'll never happen. Ever happen. Never happen.
Okay.
The Republicans won the majority. They're not going to give it to a Democrat. Please, let's stop this nonsense. Whoever's putting it out there. It just can't happen. And now we go into the other thing. The Democrats are never going to support people that Republicans put up. Ever. You think the Democrats are going to support Jim Jordan? Steve Scalise? Now, are the Republicans going to dig deep and find somebody else? They'll never get 218 points. We are looking at the potential of permanent paralysis in the House of Representatives because of the political dysfunction of this country. Are the Democrats capable? This is all about the Democrats now. I love how people say the Democrats are going to use this against the Republicans. Well, the Republicans started something. Yes, Matt Gaetz is going to be, but I'll tell you what, when was the last time any one of those members of Republican, Matt Gaetz took down a Speaker of the House. Matt Gaetz took down a Speaker of the House. Matt Gaetz took down a Speaker of the House. No one else can say that in the history of the United States Congress. So say what you want about Matt Gaetz, and I'm not his biggest fan. He did something that nobody else has been able to do. And all those little people in the House of Representatives are sort of jealous of him for the power that he now enjoys. That's half the issue, is that Matt Gaetz has more power than many people want him to have. And he will continue to hold this power as long as he has these votes. And I will tell you also, as this issue goes on, more and more Republicans will defect to Matt Gaetz's little camp because it's a power base now. They've leveraged it until the Democrats wake up. But when, as long as Mr. Jeffries says we're not going to support the right wing candidate, as long as the Democrats think they're in control, they're actually going to pay. There's going to be a huge political backlash against them because say what you want. This is a Republican House. The Republicans get to pick their speaker. And when the Republicans put somebody up and the Democrats don't vote for them, then it's a Democrat problem. And I think that's the kind of political game we're going to be playing here. This crisis could end today, right now. All the Republicans have to do is say, we want Jim Jordan. And the Democrats go, fine, everybody vote for Jim Jordan. He gets 218, he's in. But that ain't going to be what happens. And so we're going to see this game being played. The Democrats think they have some sort of leverage. Again, I'm just a historian. I'm not a political scientist. But I don't see, I see continuing paralysis. And this is bad news for the Ukrainians. Because as long as there's this paralysis, no money's being said. Now watch Joe Biden. He's running around saying, I think there's other ways that I can get money there. Really, Joe, read the Constitution, pal. Read the Constitution. You have a situation right now where the Republicans are dying for reasons to impeach you. Try violating the Constitution to get money to Ukraine, and give the Republicans a legit, I'm not saying that their reasons right now are illegitimate. I'm just saying that the whole corruption thing is still, I think the Republicans jumped the gun for political purposes. They hadn't made their case as strong as it needs to be. But the president violating the Constitution to get money to a foreign power, especially one that he is accused of colluding with in corrupt fashion. So we're in what's that old Chinese curse? May you live in interesting times. Man, do we live in interesting times. But I don't see a rapid resolution. This I can be proven wrong. Maybe the Democrats will wake up and realize that the mud is being put on them pretty thick very soon if they don't get the government back in running order. And it's up to the Democrats. The Republicans aren't going to pick the person the Democrats want. The Republicans are going to pick somebody who pursues the kind of conservative values that the Republicans claim to. Never forget that each one of these Republican representatives has to run for re-election in 2024. Every single one of them. And never forget that the guy who's likely to be on the head of the Republican ticket is Donald Trump, unless he self-destructs and goes to jail. Even then, he might be on the ticket. And you're looking at, and this entire political race is becoming so insane, where American voters are rallying around Trump, not because he's a man of ideas, but because they hate the Democrats so much that they resent what they think is the politicization of the justice system to go after Trump. They're not making legal arguments. They're making emotional arguments. We have an electorate that's voting emotionally. And so all these wonderful little Republicans out there saying that I believe in compromise, I believe in this. Hey, dude, that ship's passed. And it's nice that you believe in it, but it's not what's happening right now because the Democrats don't believe in it either. Until we get members of Congress who are willing to sit down and work with others across the aisle for the common good of the American people, we're going to be paralyzed.
So with this being paralyzed, how big of a role is funding for Ukraine? Is it a big role or is it an inconsequential role? Funding for Ukraine.
Well, I mean, it's a big deal for Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's life and death for Ukraine. But for America, look, Biden has made this a political thing. Bottom line is Ukraine could collapse today and the United States wouldn't see any difference in any aspect of its geopolitical posture around the world. We've exaggerated Russian intent. All the Russians want is stability. If the war ended today, things would actually improve for everybody in the world. That's a statement of fact. Biden, once it becomes impossible to get this funding put forward in a timely fashion, I think you're going to see Biden dropping Ukraine like a bad habit. And he was always going to do that because this is unsustainable. What about the poor Ukraine? What about the poor Afghan people? Remember, we made similar arguments back when we were saying that Afghanistan was the center of the universe. It was life and death. We have to fight them over there, so we don't fight them here. And then overnight, we're out of there. We're going to be out of Ukraine overnight in the not so distant future. And one of the reasons is that we're not going to be able to get a funding package for them. But for the American, from a political standpoint, I believe that the border is a far more important issue to the American people than Ukraine is. I believe a $33 trillion deficit is a far more important issue to many Republicans than Ukraine is. Because again, other than superficial things, there's Nazis in Ukraine. We haven't done an accounting. Look at even Rand Paul, a man who has stood up and demanded that there be fiscal accountability. When you start digging into there, he can't articulate sound reasons why we shouldn't be supporting Ukraine, other than we're not doing that. If we came back to him and said, we'll put an inspector general in place who can account for every penny, he'd be going, because he can't articulate why it's a bad idea to fund Ukraine. A lot of the Republicans right now, they're saying we shouldn't continue to fund it because, not because it's a bad idea, but because we should be spending the money on better ideas. This is a problem. And this is, again, where I disagree with Diane. There is such superficial understanding of the complexities of Ukraine and the realities of our geopolitical situation in America today. And if you rely on simple arguments, there's Nazis, they haven't accounted for the funding adequately. You know, the Nazi problem could be solved by the Ukrainians passing a law today that said we outlaw the Sloboda Party and we downgrade Stepan Bandera to criminal instead of hero. It's just a superficial thing. They do it, that nothing changes. But now everybody said there's Nazis in Ukraine. You don't have that argument anymore. It's gone. They just took it away. Now what do you say? Unless you can come back to talking about the expansion of NATO, the role that trying to strip Ukraine away from Russia, things of that nature, unless you can articulate about the entire, complexity of the Ukrainian reality, you expose yourself to being outmaneuvered by politicians. And that's what politicians do best. The moment somebody gets some political leverage on an issue, they make the issue go away by simply redefining the problem without actually changing the problem.
So Scott has to leave in a few minutes, Diane. Do you have a rebuttal?
Yes, because I think that there is another domain which we enter, which Shelley describes in the defense of poetry, which is the domain of a revolution, like the Berlin Wall coming down. And what Shelley describes there is that individuals find themselves in a position like a trumpet. A trumpet doesn't know what it is sounding, but it gives a call to battle nonetheless that people respond to. And in a moment of crisis where people can't survive, and I think the number one issue actually is the economy and the economic breakdown. People talk about freedom. You don't have freedom if you can't afford a car, can't afford a house, can't afford groceries. And we're at a breaking point. So the things that may or may not seem to be significant, on which everything hangs, end up somehow taking on a new significance. Biden has chosen to tie himself to Ukraine and the aid for Ukraine. Therefore, I think it is an issue of singular importance to focus on, to get a shift in the entire situation, not because that's the cause or the major thing of it's not in that sense, although the survival of the human race depends on us stopping this foolishness. So I think we're in a different kind of period, which requires leadership and requires a commitment by a few to heavy ideas, and that the population can be moved. It's not a guarantee, but there is something shifting here, which is very fundamental, which is why this thing could happen with McCarthy. And I think we have to press forward very hard to get that kind of shift.
Scott has to leave in a minute, so final word. What are you up to, Diane? How's your campaign going?
It's going very interestingly. Everything that I built when I ran against Schumer exists, so it's growing very quickly. The biggest challenge is funding. And I think it's also very interesting, obviously, if Robert Kennedy Jr. runs as an independent, that totally changes the playing field for those of us who are independents who have chosen not to align with either of the major parties. So that's what I can say about it.
Scott, how's your movie going?
I mean, we're still in the conceptual and the storyboarding and that, but it's going very well. Good progress. We have a lot of a lot of pieces moving. We just need to do what all people need to do. Diane has a problem funding politics. I have a problem funding the movie. We get enough money, we can hire the right people, and we can make things happen. Otherwise, we just continue to do what we can do within the, with the framework of reality. I will say this: anybody watching might come across and think that I'm opposed to Diane Sare. I'm not opposed to Diane Sare at all. I want everything she says to come out and be the truth. My problem isn't Diane. My problem is I'm just losing faith with the American people. I'm not a politician, so I don't have to wake up every morning and go out there and restore my faith in humanity. I just take a look at the absolute disgusting state of the American people today. I look at my neighborhood, I look at the state, I look at the nation, and we just are a bunch of lemmings who are just plodding one foot after another towards a cliff. We know the cliff's there, and we're not doing anything to stop it. There's a handful of people like Diane who are trying to stop it, working very hard to stop it. I count myself in her number, but you just got me on one of those days where I woke up and I'm just so mad at the anti-war movement. I'm mad at American politicians. I'm angry at the American people for allowing this to happen. Maybe next time we talk, I'll be in a more positive spirit, and I'll be I'll be more effusive. But I am just fed up with the peace movement. I am 100% fed up with the peace movement, because they're not a peace movement; they're a war movement. And there's, like I said, there's little groups out there that do nice things here and there, but they can't coalesce. They have no meaningful political power, and they're hypocritical in the extreme. And it comes down to on Ukraine, they just have no clue what they're talking about. They have no clue what they're talking about, and they're not consistent with, I'll just leave it there. Like I said, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning, so we probably should have had this conversation at a different day.
So I'm sure that the drama over the speakership isn't going to be solved very quickly. So I'm sure we'll have another conversation about that. You've been listening to Scott Ritter, Diane Sare. This is Issues That Matter. And if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks, Scott, Diane. We'll talk again. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a great day.